All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to this explainer, where we are going to break down a truly monumental shift in India's trade finance landscape. We're diving deep into the highly technical FEDI model policy and standard operating procedure for FEMA 23R. Basically, we're moving away from a world of rigid, prescriptive rules and stepping into a completely new era of principle-based, risk-driven banking.
So, is your bank actually ready for October 1st, 2026? It's the million-dollar question, right? With that deadline fast approaching, every AD banker and trade finance pro needs to wrap their head around this fundamental shift. You are no longer just checking boxes anymore. You are actively managing risk.
To get us ready, we're going to run through 5 key themes today: the core paradigm shift, streamlining exports, navigating imports, handling special trades like MTT, and finally, the digital tracking that holds the whole shebang together.
Starting off with Section 1, the principle-based paradigm shift. Let's see how this actually hits your day-to-day operations.
Think of this as a total reversal. Back in the old 2015 regime, the RBI was essentially holding our hands, dictating every single prescriptive detail and fixed threshold. But jump to the new 2026 rules, you, the AD banks, are now the captains of the ship. The RBI is just giving you the principles, and you've got to rely on your own internal policies and risk-based due diligence to make the final calls.
Under Regulation 19, it literally becomes your bank, your policy. You are on the hook now for figuring out the specific documentation, setting up processing timelines, and building out those delegation matrices. And you can't just create these in a vacuum. They have to be tailored specifically to your unique customer profiles and rigorous internal risk assessments. Moving right along to Section 2, streamlining export regulations. Let's look at how this newfound freedom applies directly to exports.
Take a look at the timeline under Regulation 5. You've got your standard 15-month window from the shipment date or invoice date for services to realize and repatriate those export proceeds. But here's the kicker. That period bumps up to 18 months if your transaction is invoiced and settled in Indian rupees. It's a very clear structural incentive to push for INR trade settlement. Now, if there's one magic number you need to burn into your memory today, it's this: 10 lakh rupees, or, the foreign currency equivalent. This threshold is an absolute game changer for easing business friction, and it dictates the entire level of compliance you'll need to apply.
Here's why that number matters so much. For eligible transactions up to that 10 lakh mark, ADs have to give customers a simple self-declaration route for things like export value reductions or write-offs. Super easy, right? But the second you cross that 10 lakh threshold, the bank has to actually step in, record its satisfaction, and get hard documented evidence, like commercial dispute correspondence or a buyer's insolvency certificate.
But you really have to watch out for Regulation 13. Picture this: your buyer defaults and the delay drags on more than a year past the due date. Boom, chain reaction. Every single future export from that exporter to that specific overseas buyer gets severely restricted. They can only move forward if they get a full advance payment or an irrevocable letter of credit, at least until that original bill is finally resolved.
Okay, let's pivot to Section 3, navigating import payment rules. The 2026 framework shakes things up here just as much.
Remember that old universal $200,000 RBI monetary limit for requiring a standby LC or bank guarantee on advance import payments? Yeah, that's totally gone. Under Regulation 10, your bank has to set its own internal limits based on customer, counterparty, and country risk factors. It is a massive shift in responsibility.
Which brings us to a really sticky situation: Regulation 12, or the import not materialized scenario. This happens when an importer pays in advance, but the goods or services never actually arrive and the cash isn't brought back to India. If a transaction gets stuck here, it triggers immediate regulatory consequences.
Regulation 12 does not mess around. It acts as a strict compliance guardrail. If the importer doesn't repatriate that unfulfilled advance, they literally lose the privilege of making unsecured advance payments. Any future advance payment they attempt is going to mandate a standby LC or bank guarantee, and that penalty is locked in until the original transaction is fully regularized.
All right, let's get into the weeds with Section 4, project exports and MTT. These are definitely some of the more complex scenarios FEMA 23R tackles.
The biggest takeaway under Regulation 15, project exports no longer need that clunky, interinstitutional working group clearance. Your AD bank handles the approval now, just by satisfying itself of the project's genuineness. Exporters can even park temporary cash surpluses in short-term instruments abroad. And for merchanting trade transactions, MTT under Regulation 16, your bank has to strictly police a maximum 6-month window between the outward and inward remittances.
When you look at the FedI Guide's export operating matrix, the sheer operational detail required is kind of wild. Your operations units have to meticulously document every single extension request, reduction approval, and complex project export projection. You need a flawless audit trail for absolutely everything.
And the contract matching process, it is rigorous. For an MTT, you have to guarantee that both legs of the trade, the outward payment to the seller and the inward receipt from the buyer, perfectly align. If they don't sync up, your system absolutely cannot authorize closure.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, Digital Tracking and Compliance. Because without the tech infrastructure to back it up, this whole principles-based approach just falls apart.
Updating the EDPMS and the IDPMS systems at the exact same time as the financial credit or debit is no longer a nice-to-have, it's an absolute requirement. There is literally zero room for manual delays anymore. If a set-off or third-party payment is approved, those system updates have to happen concurrently to keep your data integrity intact.
We also got to talk about Regulation 17, which deals with international trade settlement in INR. This ties right into the RBI's evolving framework for special rupee Vostro accounts, or SRVAs. It allows for market-determined exchange rates, but you're still using the standard shipping bills and normal EDPMS closure processes, just denominated in rupees.
Crucially, anything outstanding, like unrealized exports past that 1-year mark or unmaterialized advance imports, has to be subjected to strict aging and exception monitoring within your trade processing systems. Your bank's digital infrastructure must flag these automatically.
And remember, transparency is just as critical as compliance under Regulation 19. You've got to publish your service standards, timelines, and charges publicly on your website. Interestingly, if an exporter misses an extension request deadline, you shouldn't automatically hit them with a bank penalty, but they do have to provide an explanation. You need a rock-solid escalation matrix for delayed requests, and every single deviation requires a digital audit trail.
So the shift from just blindly following rigid rules to actually owning and managing your trade risk, it is a massive opportunity, but it takes serious structural preparation. The blueprint is sitting right there in the FedI model policy. So, looking at your own internal systems and SOPs, what is your bank's next move? Thanks for tuning in to this explainer, and we will catch you next time.